All right, so now we're starting to understand that every move in the market, as we've discussed already, is formed by an initial double MB. That double MB might be two very clear MBs, but most of the time it's actually not. Most of the time it's an MB plus like a fractalized MB, or it's two fractalized MBs, or it's two fractalized MBs or MBs inside of a larger MB, or it's a fractalized MB followed by a candle-based MB. But overall, every move in the market starts with a double MB. Now, it doesn't matter whether you want to be someone that enters using a momentum-based entry off an MB where it's already delivering, or off of the initial double MB accumulation. What I want to make very clear is that for any accumulation to become clear, as we've seen now a few times in the examples as well, to go from a stage one into a stage two, so that's, when we're in a stage one and then we're going to go into a stage two, for a stage two to occur, or for a stage two to actually start, you will always have some sort of double MB that occurs. Now, again, that double MB that occurs may not be the kind of double MB that you're able to trade, or is clear to you, so therefore you take a step back and you ignore the market. But there is a double MB always before the start of a move from a stage one into a stage two. So to show you this on some level, on the visual level, what I've done is I've taken the same diagram and I've just pinpointed a few random double MBs that I would normally expect and where I would naturally expect them, and the same ones that you saw me trade and show as a live example on the 4 videos in a row where we looked at examples of using validation and entry together with MB-based entries. Every single move in the market, no matter where you are, and this is very, very key, and this is why I'm highlighting this as a diagram, will naturally start with some kind of double MB. So when we get our main flush and price begins to go from that initial stage one into a stage two, it's going to come from the formation of some kind of double MB in here and then start that move. This is the double MB, right? And now again, when I draw this, the natural assumption is that the double MB can act as a normal double MB like this, or as an MB plus a fractal MB, right? Or an MB plus a candle-based MB, just like we discussed a little bit earlier, where the purest version of a candle itself is in itself an FFMB, just pure candle. It can also be, right, the formation of an overall MB with, as we discussed a few times now, okay, good, we got a color on that, with a double MB, just like this, inside of it, right, through the fractals or through even a candle. So either way, no matter how you're looking at this, no matter how you're trying to spin it, there is some formation of a double MB that usually kickstarts a stage two move. And you will find this on any markets you look at. So far, as you're going through this, and I know this because I see it over and over again, as people begin to work through the material, through the portal, and they see the initial diagram and they start finding the diagram and they start seeing success through it, now you have the added benefit and the added lens of, hey, for each of these stages that are occurring, for each of these sections that are occurring, there is some formation of a double MB, whether it be the smallest fractal or a natural larger MB and two of them in a row or whatever. That's what kickstarts a move. Now, the reason I'm something that's important to remember is that, as I said before, there are multiple entry types as well in terms of what you're entering, right? So a lot of the time, maybe you're not even going to be entering off of particularly the double MB. Some of you are going to have systems where you'll wait for a move to start, and as the move begins, which is going to be proven by the fact that some kind of double MB has happened, you're more interested in entering on momentum-based MBs like these through a continuation of a move, which is perfectly fine. Your entries necessarily don't have to always line up with two MBs, and that's the only way you can enter, because a lot of the time you're entering on some count or on some numerous count of MB formation. Just to show you that example that we have already gone over, to remind you of this, right? If you think back to this, when I'm entering, let's say this trade, which I didn't take, right? I missed this one and I didn't take this one. But when I'm entering, let's say this trade here or this trade here, you can see the trade itself is not necessarily a double MB and only a double. Instead, price, through multiple tools already, through where it is, through the cycle, through potentially the validation time frame, and through the moving averages specifically, right, as price comes down and then starts to come up, there has already been some form of validation or some kind of start and proof of money coming in. Money coming in directly, right, validating demand, is your first potential proof of MBs being formed. And those MBs are formed across a few levels, right? You might have the FMBs. Within the FMBs, you might have FMBs within the overall MB. You might have further FMBs, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 inside of an MB, and those might all be valid entries. But notice how every single valid market, every single stage 2 market, no matter what, every single stage 2 market always begins with some initial double MB. So from a visual perspective, this is honestly what's happening. If you take the simplest version of a double MB, which we already understand, right? On one hand, the simplest version of entries is entering through an MB, and the simplest understanding of turning points or continuations or the start of a flush to keep making a move is through the formation of a double MB. Well, this is the diagram that kind of points to that. And the reason I show this diagram is because a lot of people tend to forget that double MBs and new MBs form at each part of the cycle. So some people, and they should clench and they should get rid of the fear that you might have had before, and I'll show you why in a second, where some people think that these opportunities here are truly the only opportunities available to you as a trader. And once you miss this double MB, you have to wait for price to go and fail and fuck off and die, and then start a new double MB that you can actually get involved in. That's complete nonsense. And I want to show you this firsthand here so you realize how much opportunity you actually have accessible to you. What I mean by this is double MBs will happen at basically each point of a flush, whether that flush be kind of a bigger flush, right, as a bigger stage 1 and stage 2, or of those fractals and fractals and fractals, right? It doesn't really matter. After all, or at the end of it, right, you get these double MBs that formulate. All of these can formulate the start of a new potential move, right? And this is very powerful because not only do you now have the understanding of a trend where you have multiple opportunities given the trend to get positioned, you have multiple areas within which you can get positioned, you now have multiple entry types or understandings of entry that can help you get behind a trade. So what's actually happening now is you're eliminating this need for a trade or this FOMO that a lot of traders experience when it comes to trading, right? One of the biggest issues, as I'm sure you know, is that FOMO plagues us all and we're scared that we're going to miss the trade and we take trades and we're scared of missing the double MB or the true demand validation. But now, not only do you know that if you miss the trade, that it'll likely, right? Not only do you now know that if you miss the trade, it will likely become a potentially better trade, or if you miss the trade, it might become a better trade, or if you miss the trade and it begins to go, you might get the better trade down here, right? So not only do you now know that multiple flush opportunities can still occur and give you entries through the cycle, but you also now understand that this double MB formation, or 2 MBs followed by continuations in MBs and continuations in price, they can actually come, as you can see here, from multiple areas, right, within the trend, which means that now you have no reason to be afraid, right, of missing a trade or not taking a trade because now you know that you have opportunity everywhere. So the crux of everything is that a double MB will always formulate the beginning of some move, okay? So now let's look at that next example, as I said I would look at with you, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go inside of this right here. So this is another market I personally traded. And again, here's an example of a market I traded on a 30-second, just to continuously make you aware of how the EVC functions. So you're very much aware of it, but you already kind of saw it with the NQ examples, right? If I'm trading a 30-second as my E, my V should be around a 6x multiple of that. For the most part, that puts you at around, I believe, 3 minutes, right? That's what we used on the validation. Now, I personally use a 5 minute, okay? So my personal EV for a lower time frame is a 30-second and a 5 minute. Now, does that mean that's the only way to trade? No. You saw me firsthand show you, and maybe even a 3 minute might be better. I might have to do some more testing on my own because, again, it's about the move, not about the time frame necessarily. So anything around that can work, right? So if you have an E of a 30-second, your V can be a 3 minute, a 5 minute, maybe even a 6 minute, maybe even a 4 minute, maybe even a 10 minute based on the kind of trader you want to be, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So I just want to keep that in mind with you, or keep that in your mind for now. But nonetheless, this is a trade I personally traded, right here. Now let's look at, again, the diagram in terms of where we are in this market, how it delivered, and also from the lens of a double MB will kickstart every move, even if it's not potentially tradable or clear. So let's start by going down here. And once again, right, what you can see is I labeled this thing right here as a major flush. So let me make this smaller. Okay, cool. So here we are. Price started with a major flush. And you can see I actually drew some stuff in already. Let me delete those, right? Price started with a major flush, right? And prior to the stage 1 moving into the stage 2, we of course have the formation of some kind of double MB. On one hand, and a lot of you might see this now, right? And notice how I didn't trade it, but now we can look at it after the fact. You have this MB, and really a second MB doesn't form. If this was MB1, the reality is the second MB in this case acted as a fractal of a fractal. So what I mean by that is if this is MB1, then the second MB was basically this candle, and unless you traded it, right, that might be a move that's missed. So this is the potential double MB that occurred here to kickstart this move higher. Similarly, if we get rid of this MB, right, what you also have is you can have this act right here as MB1, and then you can have this candle itself act as MB2, right, as an FFMB, right? So you can make this look as an MB1, and then let me make it pink. You can have this act as an MB1, and then an FFMB, and we count that as the MB2 because 2 MBs kickstart a move. And they might not always be clear, and they might not always be tradable, but they are occurring. And that's very important to remember because, again, we're not here to necessarily trade every single thing that occurs and always be able to predict everything that's going to happen, even though we might know how it's going to happen. We might not be able to get positioned because we understand how the concepts fall into what's happening. We understand how demand is coming into the market, how the composite operator is demanding price, accumulating price, creating accumulation, creating a cycle. It just doesn't mean that we're always capable of potentially trading it. Right? Now, again, if you notice, as I start labeling and drawing some of these MBs, you might notice what they fall in line with. Again, pay attention in some of these videos to where the 10 and the 20 is. Oftentimes, a flush or major flush will always come down into the 10 and 20 or just below the 10 and 20, and usually the MB1 or the first MB, whether it's an MB1 or an FMB1 or an FMB within an MB, whatever it might be, usually the first MB is characterized by price making its first bit of accumulation up into or just over the 10 MA. So you can see, like, I could have counted this right here as an MB1. As MB2 began to form, it failed. And then again, as price kind of got above this 10 and 20 and validated here, I could count that likely as MB1. And then this candle here would be the FFMB2, or this candle here could act as an FFMB2. Both are completely valid. Neither is right, neither is wrong. In the aftermath, we could say that this was the right one and this was the right one. It doesn't really matter, right? At the end of the day, there's a formation that is happening that is proving a certain characteristic of price, right? In this case, is double MB proving that a stage 2 is likely started, right? So again, we will be covering more MA-based material, of course, and we're going to do it with pure examples. But as I show you personal examples of stuff I've traded, of stuff I'm looking at, of stuff we're literally analyzing and marking up together, keep in mind where the averages are and how I'm using them to basically decide which MB can count as the MB1 or the MB2 or the fractalized MB or the fractalized MB. Because the thing that really leads us to deciding what might be a tradable MB or what might be a tradable double MB or a continuation MB is largely going to be dependent on other factors and the tools we use. Some of those tools include looking at a validation time frame or things like using the moving averages because they create a map, a basis around price. So remember that, write that down if you'd like to. Keep in mind the things that I show you and analyze with you, and we'll cover averages later as well. Okay, so in comes this MB1 that kind of forms off of this. And again, if we wanted to do this relative wise, right, if we had assumed that this was also an MB, we could simply say at this point, right, if this was an MB, that this guy right here, this MB1 labeled as the purple, just simply becomes an FMB1 because again, now it's relative to this MB. Otherwise, if I had entered this trade here, I would simply call this a double MB entry, MB1, MB2, or MB1, FFMB2. Either way, it's understanding, right, how to classify because it's going to be important later. Nonetheless, right, we can do all that, but I didn't even trade this part, right? This made that major flush, created that stage 1, started that stage 2, and then went into this minor flush here, right? It flushed out. Once again, take a look at where it flushed to. Flushed out just to the 1020 and under. And once again, there are ways that we can analyze the MBs here. I actually suggest some of you maybe pause this right now and even like take a quick snapshot on your phone and just think to yourself, how many double MBs or versions of double MBs that might even be tradable do you see here right now? Okay, kind of do that for yourself. Now, you can unpause, whatever. Let's go over the ones that, kind of stick out to me. So again, 10 and 20, the thing that sticks out to me instantly is this candle overall with all the stuff inside acting as the first MB, right? That's likely some kind of MB. That's an MB1. And now from here, it can get interesting, right? Because if this is MB1, this candle itself can act as an FFMB2, right? And in this case, you can see it would have worked. Now, does that mean I would have traded it personally? Probably not. It wasn't small enough. It wasn't really proof enough that this was probably an MB2. So I would have likely waited. But this is one example of a double MB kickstarting the next stage 2. And again, notice something important. All of these things can be true. The delivery is true. The market is clear. The double MBs are happening. The example is there. The cycle is there. It's even good on the validation time frame. But I didn't trade it. Right? You can see I didn't trade this for a while until much later. So again, I want to show you firsthand that once you understand how a trend template operates and what creates opportunities and how these MBs create opportunities, instead of always being frightful for when your next position is going to be or when the next trade on whatever asset is going to be, instead you become calm and oriented towards saying, okay, is this something that I'm willing to put my risk behind? And sometimes it means waiting and waiting and waiting and getting positioned here or here. And you're completely content and fine with that because now you have the accessibility and understanding of the steps that are needed to take for a move to actually begin. And you also have, beautifully enough, the exact kind of criteria with an entry that's going to happen to give you a move. So you can now analyze a market, stay out of that market even though you're correct, be correct about that market, have it deliver, and not have it affect you in a negative way because you have the full understanding of how to get positioned later if you need to. Okay. Nonetheless, this is one of the examples where if we had to label this, I would probably say, right, simply, this was an MB1 and this is now an FFMB2. Right? Simple. And that is what kickstarted this. Now, I probably would not have done that myself when trading this, but that is what's happening. And that's one way to label it because in the future, maybe this ended up being the move that started this move here and it never came back. But in this case, you can see it made a high, it started pulling back, and this acted as very likely an MB2. So now, very simply, this is another MB, double MB that most of you should have spotted, a very simple one, right? You have the MB1 characterized by the fact that we kind of validated the first MB over the averages right here. And this would be an MB2, as simple as that, right? And you can also, right, the next step of that, if you want to look at all the classifications, because again, I've shown you a few times how to look at MBs across multiple timeframes, right? And this can act as a confluence to all the things you're looking at, right? If you had labeled this entire move here, right, as an MB1, well, then this right here would basically be an FMB2 because of relativity now in size, right? So now what you have is you can have an MB1 of a larger basis with the inside being potentially an FMB1. This could be FMB1 and this would be FMB2. But you can see how, despite the fact that the classification and the labels might be different, well, the overall move is still the same. It's still showcasing the same movement. It's still showcasing the same demand. It's still showcasing the what do you call it? The demand of the composite operator and where they want to head with price. So those are some examples so far, right? So this is likely your MB1, MB2. Now another that some of you should have also likely spotted is right here, right? So what I mean by that is in relative terms, once again, let's delete this one for a second. If this is MB1 or this whole thing, or this whole thing's an MB, or this is an MB and it's forming, inside of it, right? Let's do this like this. You have this right here. That would act as a fractalized MB1, right? That's an FMB1 inside of this as an MB1. Or if we delete this, just to make it clear on the eyes, this now can act as an MB1. And you might count that as an MB1 because it started to create some sideways movement. It started to create a potential demand. Demand became validated and came up over the, in this case, 10 and 20, but mainly the 10, because that's one of the steps usually that kickstarts a MB validation or start of a move higher. So that could be an MB1. And then, just like we saw before, the candle itself, this one, can act as an FF MB2. So now what you can have is you can have MB1 as this guy here, and you have FF because it's a candle, right? The candle never had a pause. It just was a candle, MB2. Or maybe you were a little bit uncertain about it being the FFMB2, so you waited, and the next candle, once again, moved basically through the high, and then the next candle, even though it made a new high, it paused. And you can see this pause where literally the candles are compact, and they're close to each other and they're small, that in itself can act as another FMB, okay? So basically from here to here can act as an FMB. And some of you, and this is actually something I would take, but you can see on this given day I didn't. This can act as another entry through that high itself, and you get tapped in here. As this validates higher, maybe you wait a little bit, and then here you move to break even, you move your stop, and then this takes off, right? It goes on a crazy run, and that's very nice. However, right, so then again, you can have this as an MB1, and then this as an FF MB2. Same thing, right? Whether it's this candle or this candle. Now, I probably, if I had been trading this, off of the completion of this candle here, would have said that due to the movement of the last 2-3 candles and where they are in correspondence to the other tools we use, because remember, the market's not made up of just a black and white zone that you threw on or a black and white pattern you threw on. Instead, it's a game of how are the orders coming in and what are they telling us. And that game is better explained through the lens of the tools we use, right? So that might be the screener, that might be the validation time frame in terms of where we are, that might be the MBs and the MBs within MBs and the fractalized MBs and the fractalized of the fractalized MBs, and that might be where we are in terms of the cycle, and that might be where we are in terms of the moving averages. All of those things, and you can write that as a bullet point down because those are things to focus on. All those things have a say. They have a map, right, that we can follow to decide if something is worth putting our risk on or not. Because after all, as traders, all we're doing is we're looking for areas or orders where it makes sense for us to put our risk up so that we could either have that end up as a break even or a loss, or so that we can ride the coattails, right, of the composite operator and of institutions and of larger operators and of larger traders and all that stuff higher, right? And that could be our trade. So looking at this, right, I would likely say this was MB1. And I would likely say this candle itself proved to be MB2 when it paused beautifully right after this one. So either this candle or this candle. So just in the example right here in front of you, and this would likely be MB2. So again, this is basically saying that we have MB1 and then FFMB2, right? And you could also say MB1, FFMB2, and that started the move FFMB3, FFMB4. And then you decided to trade off of FFMB4. You would say enter here, maybe your stop goes somewhere here. And then as this begins the move and pauses, maybe you move your stop to break even. And then price, because it's validated demand, never returns and starts a move. And then you look to partial, and then it starts creating those momentum-based MBs that might act as future entries, but are now already on the basis of the fact that a double MB has happened and has kickstarted a stage 2 move, right? Absolutely beautiful. Phenomenal move. And look at all this, right? We can do that analysis. We can understand all of that is true. And still, I didn't personally trade this. But that's what's happening here, right? So those are the few ways that our classification of MBs and double MBs and understanding how they start moves can be used here. Let's keep going, okay? Let's go a little bit quicker now to get to the actual example. But then what do we get, right? Price starts another like flush out here. And again, to some of you, yes, those of you thinking, right, because I have it labeled here, but I don't have anything labeled here. For those of you thinking, where are the MBs in here? They also do exist. And again, I would say that if you were to start labeling, I would say this could be an MB1, and then this could be your MB2, just like that. Or very likely, because of where we are with the averages, I would probably say that this whole thing probably acted maybe like from this high or this high as MB1, right? Because that's what got us above here. Or this right here maybe acted as MB1 as it got us above there. And then this formation up here, it was already a little bit too high for me, maybe acted as MB2. But I would probably say that the double MB came from basically this FFMB right here, or this FFMB here. So, if there was, again, why did I not trade this on the day? Maybe there was something I saw in the validation. Maybe it wasn't clear enough yet on the entry or where we are in the cycle here. But had I traded this, the trade would likely be through probably the high of this if I had bought right through the high of this, or I probably would have paused and ignored this until it flushed out deeper. And then around here, maybe I would look to trade through this as another MB, right, as an MB2, but then it failed further down and created a major flush or just a normal flush. And then from there, we reset our analysis. But I wanted to pinpoint this because I want to show you that there are still double MBs within potential failed moves, but look at how they deliver and look at how they set up. In some cases, those double MBs do not fit the same criteria in terms of where they're happening, in terms of how they're occurring, where they are in terms of the moving averages. Those are all elements of potentially staying out of markets. And I probably would have very easily stayed out of this had I been on the markets and trading at this time, right? But if I had to label, right, I would probably say this was the MB1, the FFMB2, FFMB acted as the MB2 here, and that started the move. And then inside of it, you have the fractals as well that started a little move, okay? Now you can see I started labeling this. Let's go a little bit quicker. You can see as this came down, I watched basically the move through here. So again, I usually like to use a candle high to a low, right? Because it kind of corresponds well, but you have to realize how candles are created. And, you know, taking like an area here because of the pause that happened right there can act as its own MB. So I actually saw this, and you can see I kind of drew it in as MB1, right? And then I started waiting for price to come back, and it did, to start making an MB2. But as it was creating, as you can see here, MB2, it kind of took out the low, so then maybe it was an MB1, right? So again, you can see that it's not always perfect. So I was seeing this is maybe an MB1, and then inside of it, you also had this MB. So again, if this is MB1, then this right here acts as an FMB1. Now, why was it this area that I chose to maybe label this as an FMB1? Well, look at where we are on the averages. Look at where price is in terms of the averages, and then look at where it validates just over the averages. And then price pulls back to the averages and puts in beautiful candles. And this is simply an FMB2. Just in terms of this is FMB1, this is likely FMB2. Or, right, if we, again, like I said before, and I'm going to do this one more time because I think you guys understand the relativity stuff that I'm talking about. If we delete those, then you simply have MB1, MB2, okay? And that kickstarted that move. And then price started to make a stage 2, came back down for a minor flush, and again, you have the same game you can play. This is on a little bit of a fractal level, but you have FMB1, right, followed by FF MB2. And you can see in this case, you would probably use that candle itself as an FFMB, right? Because it validated the first MB. And again, look at where it's happening in terms of the averages. Then it paused for one candle, but a very small candle, a perfect little candle. So we can assume that that's probably acting as an FFMB, and it's probably not smart to wait for another candle to confirm that this is a high, and instead to treat it as an FFMB for the actual move. Now, if you waited, then theoretically, you could also argue that this is either FMB1, FMB2, or FMB1, FMB2. So again, notice how you can have multiple types of double MBs, and you might not know at the moment which one is the double MB, but, right, you create a understanding and you decide to take risk on something based on the movements that you've understood out of the market prior. And again, you're using the other tools to confirm a lot of these parts, right? And again, all of that is now happening within an MB, right? Which might actually be the double MB of a higher time frame. So this could be MB1, that could be MB2, and as a result, as we just said, this could be FMB1, FMB2, FMB1, FFMB2, and then from there spawns the stage 2 move. And still, to this point, I haven't had traded this thing. I was just following it, right? I kind of knew, I understood where it was, and I was just looking for it and seeing where it takes us. But again, these are the same things that we discussed a few times now, just shown in raw format using the visualization we had, because I want to really embed in your mind that you have countless opportunity in markets, right? In delivering markets, in cycle-based markets that are delivering, and you're not held down by only one setup, and you're not even held down by only one type of MB-based setup, right? Because there can be multiple that happen, and it's very much based on how is the move created, right? Okay, so you get a move, and you get another flush. And you can see I just labeled MBs here, but I suggest you guys pause and ask yourself once again, where are all the potential double MBs or forms of double MBs that happened here? Which ones might have you considered to enter based on just potential like double MB formations that are clear based on the things you saw before? Which ones do you see? Now, taking a look at it initially, right? I see this as an MB1. I see this as a potential MB2, right? And then within that, you can see price validated and then pause. And I probably get out of this thing at break even just because it never went. However, that is an example of a double MB. Within that, you could also argue that you had FFMB1 and then FMB2 right here. That was happening inside of an MB, perfectly fine. Now, that's preference, but I probably would not even use that. Then you had another minor flush, so this becomes like one of those red fractal stage 1s and stage 2s, where again, just like we saw here, right, you have another formation of an MB, right? And then within it, if this is an MB, then you have a fractal MB1, fractal MB2. And that kickstarts a move higher, right? And those are actually just fractal MBs, right? You have a fractal MB1, then fractal M, then it becomes so at this point right here, there we go. This would be a fractal MB1, and this candle itself would now be a FF MB2. And you could already set up a trade through the high, but then notice what happens. It doesn't tap you in, and then it just simply becomes a better trade, right? It becomes an FMB1 followed by now an FMB2. And that leads to this beautiful, beautiful move, right? And creates a move that becomes profitable or whatever, and then flushes out again, okay? And then it flushes out again. And again, if you kind of follow where we are in the cycle, you guys all remember that the moves usually start with a major flush. So that's the major flush. That then creates some kind of stage 2 into a flush, creates a stage 2 into a flush. So that's all happened now. Then that usually creates some kind of a move that either, keeps going or flushes out further. So I'm assuming that flushes out like this. So I'm assuming that this created that move and then flushed out. And then price makes usually a bigger move that then flushes out. So again, as this is all happening, I'm saying, okay, we're probably at this point here, right? We're probably here or here, not 100% sure. And then what do we usually see? We see price start to move and probably flush maybe one more time, maybe starts holding on, right? So then maybe this is that. And then price goes, maybe flushes again, and then starts a crazy, crazy move, right? So again, as I'm watching this, I'm saying, okay, I could be here or here. I could be here or here, which means I'm still in a good area for a potential trade. So again, just think back to the diagram. I'm not going to go and find the diagram again right now. So when this flush happens, I'm saying, okay, there is still likelihood for a delivery and I'm willing to trade it. And then look what happens in terms of the setup that actually occurred here. What I'll do for you guys is I'll hide it so we can kind of walk through it step by step again. So it's not just in your face, right? Okay, cool. So what happens is, if you take a look at this, right, is price flushes out under the moving averages. And again, what I'm thinking to myself is, where can my first MB or clear first MB be, right? Well, the thing that first catches my attention is probably this guy here, right? And then what happens? Let me make this gray and make it a little like this. Right, so what happens? We get MB1, right? And MB begins to form, and then the second MB begins to form right here. Right? And I decided to wait here a little bit. So I waited, and I was actually willing to potentially trade through this high, but then it failed a little deeper. So I said, okay, this whole thing here is probably creating some kind of double MB of a higher basis, right? MB1, this now might be right here, and MB2, right? But I don't want to trade this because this is a larger MB, and I'm not used to normally trading larger MBs. So I waited, and I waited. And then we got this move. So now within the MBs, given the relativity, because again, we do the relativity to understand that sometimes our good entries are actually a multitude of MBs forming together, right? So then when I saw this, where price flushed out on a mini level, so again, think fractal red, stage 1s and stage 2s, right? As it flushed out right here, I was looking at this as a potential validation of an FMB1 inside of this MB1 and a forming MB2. So I saw FMB1 and I'm thinking, okay, maybe we can pause here and create an FMB2, okay? And what happens? Price pauses. This starts creating this as an FMB2. Now, it doesn't look like I entered yet, but this is where I should be entering, right? In my eyes, I should be entering through this high right here. Or at latest, maybe I set up a buy through this high to align this FMB2 with this forming MB and this MB2 up here, because now there's alignment in terms of what's happening here. Now let's see what actually happened. Okay, so I did enter there. So you can see I entered through this FMB2 through that high. That's literally where I personally bought. That was my buy price, and I got slipped a little bit, so I kind of accounted for that when I showed it on here. Price began to validate. And at this point here, or this one here, I moved to break even. So I took my entire risk where my stop was here, and I moved it up here to the entry price. And simply from there, the rest was history. Okay? The rest was history. And I started delivering, and I took a partial, and then I closed the rest. And you know why I closed the rest of my position? Because I assumed we were completed because of where we were in the diagram. I assumed we were probably here, right? Maybe it wants to make another move, maybe it doesn't, but using the stages of delivery, I said, okay, we're probably extended. And this is one of the problems that you might run into if you don't have proper trailing rules. Look at what this did after. This thing went on to make over a double run, right? It was at 15, it went to like 30. Like, again, this is a difference of securing $10,000 on this trade and securing $20,000, $30,000 on this trade, right? This thing went to do insane things, right? And I missed it. And that's okay because I understood where I was in the move. So I understand what's naturally or what is likely going to happen based on where I was in the move. And I took proper precautions as a result. Now, could I have traded it better? Yes. I could have just let the rest run and then maybe I could get out somewhere up here, maybe, right? And maybe I'd give up all this profit or take a little partial and then I'd get out of the rest maybe somewhere here. I don't know. But that doesn't matter. What matters is at the moment, the understanding of how double MBs formulate opportunities and how they always start the potential move. And that's what most of my entries, as I said before, are all based on. They're based on the formation of these MBs, the MBs validating, and I'm entering through the validation of MBs, right? I'm buy stopping into them. Now we'll talk about entry types and all that stuff shortly as well. But this is another example of using exactly what we spoke about before, right? And that double MB kickstarted the stage 2 that then led to, as you can see here, the momentum-based MB. So this is for a different kind of trader, maybe some of you, but this is an example of a momentum-based MB where if you enter through this high, I'd probably even break even on this candle and get stopped out already right here. And that's fine, right? And then maybe you end up trading this again, maybe like through this high here, you enter, you move to break even, you take a partial, you trail the rest, 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 and you get stopped out right here. And then all of a sudden, this tiny, tiny trade, right, with an entry here, maybe a stop somewhere here or somewhere here, right, becomes an insane gainer to you, right? And that could be a momentum-based MB off of the understanding of where you are in the cycle, of the cycle delivering, and of the cycle now being in a stage 2, given the setup that happened here. So now the likelihood is continuation, and you enter through the following momentum-based MBs, right? So again, just, you can write that down because these are an entry type, but we'll talk about them. And right now, I'm just showcasing the entry type that I personally use, which is trading the initial double MBs or 3, 4, just depending on how it goes, that form after a flush, okay? Beautiful. So there's that. Opportunities are everywhere. They happen over and over and over again. They get presented multiple times, and they get presented in different ways every single time because of how double MBs operate, right? Where they're not this perfect, like perfect square, place a buy. It's not how markets work necessarily, right? You might find examples of that, and you might want to be a trader that waits for only that to happen, but that does mean less opportunities. The more specific your thing is, the less opportunities you might have. But again, that might be a good thing because maybe it means that you're very profitable. Nonetheless, opportunities are everywhere. The idea of FOMO and stuff, it should already be evaporated just through the fact that you're learning what you're learning in this course, and you're actually learning what comes, what you actually get out of the market. And hopefully you're showing up to webinars where you're getting the psychology you need to not make dumb mistakes, right? But this is let's say the technical sauce, the technical analysis that actually proves that opportunities are everywhere and that FOMO has no place in your trading, and that these small emotional triggers that might have bothered you before are completely worthless. So right now your focus should go to directly understanding how the cycle delivers across timeframes, or E and the V at this point, and how entries present themselves. Okay, I'll see you all in the next one.